Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Legacy Parent Academy. I'm Katherine Fagans, the Crisis Prevention and Intervention Specialist for KDISD. I'm joined with my coworker, Angie Kelly, Safe and Supportive School Specialist for KDISD, and then Megan Cowles, who's the TCHAT representative. So we're glad to have everyone tonight investing their time into this situation. We are recording this session, so families who can attend, they can still benefit from the information. Tonight's topic is one we're seeing more and more in schools. It's about anxiety. It's showing up earlier, lasting longer, and impacting students' learning, behavior, and relationships in ways we can't ignore. So the good news is that whenever families understand what's going on, and how to respond, it really makes a difference. So we're fortunate to have a strong partner with us this evening through Texas Child Health Access through telemedicine. This program works alongside schools across Texas to expand access to mental health supports for students and families. Our presenter tonight is Megan Cowles. Megan is a licensed clinical social worker and board approved supervisor in Texas. She is currently pursuing her Doctor of Social Work at the University of Kentucky. She earned both a BSW and MSW from Texas State University and brings extensive experience in the school-based and statewide mental health initiatives. She currently serves as the MSW Fellowship Director and Assistant Director of Social Services at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, where she helps lead large-scale behavioral health programs, including TCHAT, focused on improving access and outcomes for students across Texas. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me. So I'll just jump right in. Thank you for the introduction. I am the director of TCHAT and I'm with UT Health Houston. And tonight our topic is going to be helping my child manage stress and anxiety. So before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to walk through what we'll be focusing on tonight. The first goal is really about understanding stress, what it looks like in children, what might be contributing to it, and how it can show up in their development and their daily environment. And because stress in kids doesn't always look the way we expect it to, we're also going to talk about anxiety as well in a similar way, how to recognize it, what might be causing or increasing it, and what kinds of symptoms you might notice at different ages or stages. And then probably most important part of today is what can we actually do about it as a caregiver, right? So we'll spend time on practical, realistic ways to support children as they cope with stress and anxiety, things that you can use as caregivers in everyday moments. And the overall goal here isn't to make anyone an expert overnight, but to help you feel a little bit more confident in recognizing what's going on and responding in a way that can really support your child. So let's start with a really simple but important question. What is stress, right? At its core, stress is that feeling of being overwhelmed, feeling like we can't quite cope with what's being asked of us, whether that's mentally or emotionally. And while we often think about stress in adults, kids experience it too, sometimes even more than we realize. So another helpful way to think about stress is like as a kind of like an imbalance. It's the tension between what a child is facing, such as like the challenges, the demands, or the pressures in their life, and the skills or supports that they have to handle those challenges. So I'm going to use an example throughout the entire presentation, but I felt like it was pretty relevant for what a lot of kiddos are going through right now. We have a child who has a big test coming up at school, right? If they feel prepared, supported, confident, it's normal to feel a little nervous, right? But they can manage it. Um, that's a manageable level of stress, right? But if that same child is already tired, maybe struggling with the material, doesn't feel like they have the help or support that they need, that same test can suddenly feel super overwhelming. That's when stress starts to build up, right? That's an important piece for us as caregivers to be aware of and to know about, right? Because it reminds us that stress isn't just about what's happening to a child, but also about what resources they have available to them. Things like coping skills or emotional support, routines, relationships, all of these things make a difference. So as we move forward, we're going to keep coming back to that idea, how can we not only understand what's stressing a child, but also help strengthen the supports around them. So now that we have a little sense of what stress is, let's talk about how it actually shows up in kiddos, because it's not always obvious, right? Stress can show up in three main ways. So we have physically, we have emotionally or cognitively, and then behaviorally, right? So physically, kids might complain, "Hey, I have a headache, my stomach hurts really bad, I'm just really tired, I don't think I'm sleeping well," right? You might notice things like sweating, their muscles are tense, right? Or even changes in things like their asthma or migraines. Sometimes what looks like a physical issue could actually be stress showing up in the body. Emotionally and cognitively, stress might look like increased worry, irritability, could even look like anger. A child might seem more sensitive than usual or have trouble concentrating or struggling with memory. You might also notice a drop in motivation, right? Things they used to enjoy, they suddenly are just like, I'm not really interested in that anymore. Um, and then behaviorally, this is often where parents notice changes first. Things like nail biting, restlessness, difficulty sleeping, or a change in their eating habits. And you might also see more conflict with others, or withdrawing socially, or procrastinating more than usual. So, to kind of go back to our example with the child that has that upcoming test, right? Stress might not just look like them saying, I'm stressed. A lot of the times kids don't have the vocabulary or like the cognitive connection to just say, I'm stressed. Um, Instead, it might look like complaining of a stomach ache before going to school, right? Getting irritable over small things, having trouble focusing on their homework, or they might be putting it off altogether, right? So the key takeaway is that stress can show up in a lot of different ways, and not all of them are immediately recognizable as stress, right? If someone tells me I have a stomach ache, I'm going to start looking, well, have you drank water? Have you ate, right? I'm going to look at all the factors that contribute to that, and I might not realize it might be stress related. Um, so when we see these types of patterns, it's really helpful to pause and ask ourselves, not just like what's the behavior, but is there anything underneath it, you know? So um, that brings up the question, is stress actually bad? Well, the answer is no. Not all stress is harmful. In fact, it's actually really healthy and necessary to experience stress. Okay, so stress has a function, and it's our body's way of preparing us to respond to a challenge. Okay, it can help us stay alert, focused, motivated. Without any stress at all, it would actually be really hard for kids and us adults to learn and grow and to push ourselves, right? Um, so again, going back to the test example, right? It's okay for them to feel a little nervous about a test. That can actually help them focus better, study, or perform better. That's what we call positive stress. Positive stressors are things that are, a little challenging. We need a little challenge in our life, but they're still manageable, especially when a child has support. Um, these could be things like starting a new school year, right? Trying out for a team, learning a new skill, meeting new friends, or even taking on a slightly harder assignment or a harder class. They find that stress challenging, but it has a positive aspect to it. Um, but again, these aspects or experiences, excuse me, can feel a little uncomfortable like in the moment, but they help build confidence and coping skills over time. When stress becomes a concern is when it's too intense, right? It lasts too long, or maybe like when a child doesn't have the support or tools that they need to manage it. That's when it can start to have a negative impact. So the goal here is we're not trying to complete stress completely. We're not trying to eliminate stress completely, sorry. It's not realistic, right? We all experience some type of stressors in our life, right? And it's not helpful. But instead, the goal is to help children handle stress in a healthy way. And we want to build their ability to be able to cope with challenges as they come up. So, building on that idea that not all stress is bad, stress can actually be really helpful in a lot of ways. Okay. So, when it's at a manageable level, stress can make us more productive. It can help kids get things done, can help them stay on task and follow through. It also helps us stay alert, like that little boost of energy or focus that can help a child pay attention in class more or be more aware of what's going on around them. Stress is also motivating, can push us to try, to prepare, or to put in effort, even when something feels challenging. And interestingly, it can even support creativity. Sometimes a little pressure encourages kids to think in new ways or to problem solve differently. Over time, experiencing manageable stress and getting through stressors helps build resilience. Kids start to learn that I can handle hard things, and that confidence carries forward into new situations. So again, thinking about our example, right? Kiddo with the test, that small amount of stress might be what helps them sit down to study, right? To stay focused and to feel a sense of accomplishment once they finish that test. It's really like the key is really about balance. We want enough stress to support growth, but not so much that it becomes overwhelming, right? So going to break it down a little further, right? By looking at the difference between what we might call good stress and bad stress. Okay. Good stress is usually short term. It's like those temporary challenges that push us to focus, to learn, and improve our performance, right? For kids, this might look like starting a new school year, like I said, trying something new, prepping for the test that we've been talking about. With this kind of stress, kids have a chance to adapt. They can start to figure out what helps me cope. Who can I go to for support? It can even encourage them to connect socially, like asking a teacher or a friend for help or studying with a friend, right? On the other hand, we have bad stress, which tends to be more chronic. It sticks around for a longer period of time. It can start to feel really overwhelming. This might come from things like ongoing family conflict, consistent academic struggles, or social challenges that don't really get resolved. So instead of helping, this kind of stress can lead to more anxiety, stronger negative emotions, and even a decrease in performance. So a big difference between the two often comes down to coping skills and support. So when stress isn't well managed, when a child doesn't yet have the tools or the resources that they need, that's when it can start to tip into something that could be more harmful. So, like I said, we're going to go back to this example a lot, but going back to our example, feeling a little nervous about a test, that's good stress, right? But if a child feels constant pressure, doesn't feel supported, they start to feel overwhelmed all the time, that's when we start to get into that bad stress territory. And that's really where caregiver support becomes so important. We want to help shift that balance back towards this is something manageable. This is something that you can do. You're going to make it through this, and I'm here to support you along the way. Excuse me. So I want to kind of take a look at some of the common types of stress that kids and teens experience, because a lot of these might already sound familiar to you. One big one is procrastination related stress. Anyone, yeah, I know we can't see, but think about, does anyone have a kiddo out there who likes to procrastinate? This is when our kids put something off, right? Then suddenly they feel rushed or overwhelmed trying to finish it in a short amount of time, such as it's right before bedtime and they forgot that they had a major project due first period tomorrow, right? Um, Sometimes even well-intended time limits can add pressure if a child's already struggling to get started. Another common type of stressor is what we call perfectionism. Some kids set really high and sometimes unrealistic standards for themselves. They feel like they have to get everything exactly right, and that pressure can build up really quickly. Also, worrying about their future. Even at a young age, kids can start thinking ahead. That's normal, Thinking about things like school, friendships, expectations, that uncertainty can create some stress sometimes. Family plays a really big role too. Stress can come from family pressure, conflict, or even just overall environment at home. And something that's really important to keep in mind is that kids, don't just respond to what we say, they also pick up on the things that we don't say. So children are very sensitive to stress in the people around them, especially their caregivers. Even if you're not talking about what's going on, a lot of the times kids can pick up on our tone of voice, our body language, or tension that's present in environments. We also have social stress, right? Things like peer pressure, conflict with our friends. It can feel really intense for kids and teenagers. It's tough, right? And of course, there are situational stressors, right? Studying for test, moving, starting at a new school for the first time, transitioning to a new school. So like elementary to middle, middle to junior, junior to high school, or even a different grade. But even positive changes can feel stressful. And then also we have the achievement related stress. So whether that's academic, sports, extracurriculars, wanting to do well is really, really great, right? Everyone wants to do well. But sometimes it can come with a lot of pressure that is hard for kids to manage. So with the kiddo with the upcoming test, you can see how it's not just about the test itself, right? It could also involve procrastination, pressure to do well, worrying about their future and how this test is going to impact it, or even picking up on stress at home. There's all these different layers, okay? And all these layers can build on each other, which is why it's so important to look at the bigger picture when a child might seem stressed. So next, let's talk a little bit about why some children may be more vulnerable to stress than others, because not all kids respond to stress in the same way. First, we have age. We also have development, and both of these things matter a lot. For example, kiddos who are under 5 are in a really critical developmental period. They are learning so many foundational skills at one time. So they're learning how to regulate their emotions. They're trying to secure and learn language, just the simple language that they're going to speak. Social skills, right? Interacting with others, even their basic independence, right? Like, how do I begin to take care of myself? So while some stress is actually helpful for development, too much can become overwhelming very quickly at this age. And even as kids get older, we can think about stress in terms of what's happening around them. Is it something more long-term, like a major life change, such as divorce? Or is it something smaller, like I lost my homework, or I'm just having a really tough day at school? Even small stressors can add up over time, especially if they happen repeatedly. This is important because stress isn't always about one big event. Sometimes it's an accumulation of multiple small stressors that slowly wears down a child's ability to cope with things. We also know that kids who are dealing with multiple stressors at the same time, so things like, again, school pressure, friendship challenges, challenges at home, are more likely to feel overwhelmed. And then some children also have a tendency to blame themselves when things go wrong, okay, which can increase stress and anxiety. So along with that, kids with a lower tolerance for stress or certain temperaments, like being more sensitive or easily overwhelmed, may react more strongly when challenges are presented in front of them. Prior experiences matter too. Children who've had earlier emotional, behavioral, or psychological challenges may be more vulnerable moving forward. And support systems are really important here. Kids who are socially isolated or who don't have strong connections with peers or adults, they might have fewer resources to help them out. Even lifestyle factors, so things like being overscheduled with activities, not getting enough sleep, poor eating habits, or ongoing health concerns can all reduce a child's ability to be able to successfully manage stress. So when we think about vulnerability, it's really not just one thing. It's a combination of development, of our environment, of our temperament, and our support. And that helps us understand why two children can experience the same situation, but respond totally different. So now we get to one of the most important pieces. How do we as caregivers help build resilience in children? What do we do? What's our part, right? And a big part of that actually starts with us. One of the most powerful things that we can do is pay attention to our own stress levels. I know some of you are also probably shaking your head of like, yeah, I got some stress going on, right? But how am I handling that stress? How am I presenting that stress when my children are around, right? Kids are extremely observant. They are watching the world around them, right? Because they're still figuring it out. They're still developing. They're figuring out their ways of how they're going to handle things, right? They often learn from us and do the things that we do, right? Anyone ever seen their kid have a reaction that you've had before and you're like, where did you learn that from? And you're like, oh, wait, that was me. So to, when we notice our own stress, right? We name it, we show healthy ways of coping with it, right? We want to model those skills for them, right? That might look like saying, in that moment, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go breathe. I'm going to reset, right? There is nothing wrong with being a parent and taking a break. That is okay. And that is such a simple tool. You're modeling that, right? And you're teaching kids that stress is manageable, right? Like, let me just step away for a second, or let me regroup. Let me take a breath, right? And it shows them that it's okay to do those things, you know? Another important piece is managing activities and expectations. It can be worth asking, is my child overscheduled? Sometimes kids love to do things, right? We have a lot of positive activities, academics, sports, family things, hobbies, all of this, right? But sometimes having too much of those can become stressful if there's just a lot going on. And just as important, are we building in moments for like rest and recovery, right? I think we all as adults probably don't get enough, but we all know that we need time to reset, right? After both expected and unexpected stressors, right? Kids need the same thing. They need reset, they need relax, they need space to chill, right? So without that space, stress can build up really quickly. We can also actively help kids build coping strategies. These don't have to be complicated either. Things like journaling can help kids express their thoughts and feelings. Physical activity is really great. Sports, going on a walk, simple yoga poses. There's so many yoga poses on YouTube and platforms like that that families can do together, or, just anything that can help them release some of that tension in their body if they're feeling stressed. There's more advanced ones. So we have like relaxation techniques, progressive muscle relaxation. These are things that can help kiddos notice and let go of physical stress in their bodies. And one of the simplest but most powerful tools is breathing. Deep, mindful breathing. We have square breathing that can help kids slow down their bodies, regain a sense of control in stressful moments. We always have breathing with us. We have a small sample, a few slides in, but just taking a breath. Sometimes we're not even aware of how our breathing is. And kiddos don't ever think about how they're breathing either unless someone calls attention to it. So just a quick, deep breath in and breath out, can help us just kind of reset a little bit. So overall, resilience isn't about eliminating stress, okay? It's about helping kids and ourselves build the tools to manage it, recover it, and go through it, right? as we talked about, stress is a normal part of life. We can't avoid it, so we have to learn how to go through it. So now let's talk about what coping with stress actually looks like in day-to-day parenting, right? A big first step, like I said, is simply noticing and acknowledging that the stressors your child may be experiencing. This doesn't mean solve everything right away, but more so recognizing, okay, this is probably something that's a little difficult for them right now. Having that awareness alone can be really grounding for a child. Is there anything stressing you out? Are you doing okay? How are you feeling? Right? That awareness alone, like I said, can be really grounding. The next piece is providing support, right? This can look different depending on your situation. Might be listening without immediately jumping in for advice, offering reassurance, or some kiddos just need you to be physically present. Um, a lot of times kids don't need a solution right away. We want to try to help them figure it out. But they also don't like to feel like they're alone in what they're going through. So being there for them, right? I also want to help them identify what we call positive coping skills. Over time, we can guide them towards things that actually help them feel better or more in control, whether that's talking about it or taking a break or doing something physical or using a calming strategy, things like breathing and journaling, right? Another important piece is planning for future coping, right? When a child gets through a stressful situation, even with support, right, that experience becomes something that they can really build on. And it helps them feel and understand, okay, I can really handle hard things. I got this, right? And we can reinforce that as a caregiver by helping them reflect on it. For example, we might say, next time I deal with a challenging situation, I can what? And help them fill in that blank, right? Maybe it's I can ask for help earlier, or I can take a break before I get overwhelmed, or I can use a breathing strategy. Over time, these types of experience help build their confidence, right? Not because the stress goes away, but because they start to believe that they have those tools that they can handle whatever the stressful situation is. So, this idea that there are no bad emotions is really important when we think about stress and anxiety in children. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. We want to be able to have all the feels, right? Often kids and even adults can feel like emotions such as anger, sadness, worry, frustration are things that we should try to get rid of or avoid, right? But the reality is that all emotions serve a purpose. They're signals that tell us something about what's going on inside or around us. For example, anxiety might be telling us that something feels uncertain or unsafe. Anger might be pointing to a boundary that's been crossed. Sadness might be signaling a sense of loss or disappointment. Even stress itself is the body's way of preparing us to respond to a challenge. So instead of thinking of emotions as good or bad, right, it can be more helpful to think of them as information. Okay. Going back to our earlier example about the kiddo with the stress in the test, right? If they're feeling nervous or overwhelmed, that emotion isn't something to shut down or dismiss. It's actually a clue that they might need some support, some preparation, and some reassurance from us as caregivers. So, what we want to help children learn is not how to avoid emotions, but how to notice them, how to understand them, right? And how to respond to them in healthy ways. So, the goal isn't don't feel anxious or don't feel upset. It's learning I can feel this, I can handle this, right? I got this, I'll be fine. So, we've been focusing on stress. We're going to talk about anxiety and how it's related to, but also different than stress, right? We tend to put the two terms together. Um, but we have the American Psychological Association that defines anxiety as an emotion that involves feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes in the body, like an increased heart rate or blood pressure. So it's not just something in our thoughts, It shows up in our bodies too. Another helpful way to understand anxiety is to think of it as an alarm system. It's the body and the brain prepping for something that might happen in the future, right? Again, keyword on that might. It's that sense that something bad could happen, even if there's no immediate danger in front of us. So, kiddo with the test, right? Stress might be feeling overwhelmed about studying or the workload. Anxiety would be more like, what if I fail? What if I do badly and something goes wrong because of it? Anxiety is really like that future focused worry. And just like with stress, anxiety is not automatically bad. It's actually a protective system. Okay. It's just us trying to help prepare and stay safe. But when that alarm goes off too often, too intensely, or for situations that aren't actually dangerous, that's when it can start to interfere with a child's daily life, right? Things like school avoidance, right? Or anxiety about going to certain classes because that class is really challenging. So the key here is that anxiety is the body's way of anticipating and preparing, but sometimes it can overestimate the level of threat, and that's where support really becomes important. So just like stress, anxiety can show up in different ways. We usually see it in those three main areas like we talked about with stress. So physically, emotionally, or cognitively, and behaviorally. Physically, anxiety shows up in the body first. You might see things like an increased heart rate, muscle tension, upset stomach, hyperventilating. Some kids describe it as feeling shaky or tense or just nervous in their body. But do you see how there's some similarity to stress, right? And so that's why it's very important for us to understand what is it? Emotionally and cognitively, anxiety is really about worry, but not just everyday worry, okay? It can become more intense or feel really hard to control. Kids might describe it as constant worrying, excessive nervousness, or feeling like their brains just won't stop thinking about what could go wrong. And then behaviorally, we often see changes in what kids do. One of the most common symptoms is avoidance, okay? Avoiding people, places, or things or situations that might trigger anxiety. For example, like I just kind of said, not wanting to go to school, avoiding tests, steering away from certain social situations. You might also see difficulties with sleep, being restless, changing in eating habits, okay, or even isolation, okay, where a child starts pulling away from friends or activities that they once normally enjoyed. So again, going back to our example with the test, anxiety might not just look like saying, I'm worried. It could show up as a stomach ache in the morning, refusing to go to school, difficulty the night before, or constantly asking, hey, what's gonna happen if I fail this test, right? And what's important to notice is that anxiety often tries to protect the child by helping them avoid something uncomfortable. But over time, that avoidance can actually make anxiety stronger, right? So part of our role as caregivers is helping children notice these patterns and gently support them in facing things in manageable and supportive ways. So now we can look at anxiety from a slightly different angle because just like stress, anxiety and fear actually have really important purposes. They are okay, right? No emotions are bad. Children naturally experience a lot of fears as they grow up, right? And while that can feel concerning for adults, fears actually serve an adaptive or protective function. So, for example, fear can motivate children to seek comfort and safety from their caregivers. So, a young child being afraid of the dark might call for a parent. That connection is actually part of healthy development. Um, Fear can also alert children to potential danger. It helps them pay attention to, maybe things in their environment that might not be safe, like traffic or unfamiliar situations. And in terms of common fears, like especially in childhood, we often see things like fear of the dark, fear of being hurt or in accidents, fear of strangers or someone breaking into their home, fear of separation from caregivers, fears of loud noises, or even fears related to like ghost monsters, right? These fears are very common across development, and in many cases, they reflect a child's growing imagination combined with developing an understanding of the world. So, one important thing to keep in mind today is that children are also really exposed to a lot of information, a lot more than they used to be, right? Whether that's through media, social platforms, they are seeing images and stories about things like natural disasters, violence, global events, community events. It's increasing anxiety. I'll just be straightforward, right? The challenge with all of that is that children don't always have the developmental ability to separate what is a threat, right, versus what is actually relevant or likely in their immediate environment, right? So if we think about a global threat in an immediate environment, they might not be able to separate the two. That's normal because they're developing, right? As adults, we can do that, but a child might not be able to do that. So something that they see on a screen, right, can feel just as real or immediate as if something is happening right next door to them. So part of supporting children isn't just helping them manage fear, it's also about helping them understand context, reality, what's actually relevant to their safety, okay? So building on that, it's important to really understand that while fear and anxiety can be normal and even helpful, sometimes they move into what we call maladaptive anxiety. So anxiety disorders are actually the most common mental health disorders in childhood, which is why it's so important to understand what this shift can look like. Some common forms include we have generalized anxiety disorder, where a child worries about many different things for most of the time. We have separation anxiety disorder, which involves intense distress when being away from caregivers. And we also have social anxiety, right? Social phobia, where children feel a strong fear of being judged or embarrassed in social situations. So the question becomes, when does normal worry cross the line into something that's more concerning, right? We start to think about, we start to think about anxiety as maladaptive when it becomes excessive, meaning it's stronger or more frequent than what we would expect for the situation. It also becomes concerning when it feels uncomfortable, right? Like the child can't seem to turn that worry key off, right? Even when they want to. Another sign is when it starts interfering with daily functioning. So instead of just feeling nervous before school, a child is now avoiding school, they're struggling socially, or they're having difficulty keeping up academically. So avoidance, again, is a big piece here. While avoidance might reduce anxiety in the short term, right? If I stay away from that thing that makes me anxious, I feel better, right? Doing that reinforces the fear over time, which makes it more stronger and more persistent. And over time, repeated activation of the stress system can actually change how a child responds to the world. So some children become hypervigilant, constantly scanning for danger or threat, even when there isn't one, right? So sensitive to anxiety that even the feeling of anxiety itself is something that they try to really avoid and really fear, you know. So we sometimes see what we call a cycle where the child isn't just afraid of situations, but they become afraid of feeling anxious in those situations, which then leads to more avoidance, right? And that's why early recognition and support are so important, because this is a pattern that we can help interrupt with the right tools and the right strategies. So what can we do about it, right? What can I actually do about my child's anxiety? One of the biggest patterns, like I said, in anxiety is avoidance, When a child feels anxious, their natural response, is often to avoid whatever's triggering that feeling. And in the short term, it actually works, right? It brings us relief. But when the problem is what happens over time, right? When we repeatedly avoid something, we're reinforcing our anxiety, and our brain learns that must have been really dangerous if I needed to avoid it, right? Even when it's not. And just as importantly, avoidance prevents practice, right? Kids don't get the chance to learn, I can handle this, right? Or build confidence through experience. So the anxiety stays or it grows and gets bigger. That's why part of supporting anxiety is helping children gradually break things down. So instead of facing something all at once, what we want to look at is what is specifically making them anxious and try to make it feel more manageable. That's what we call step by step. At the same time, it's really important that we remember that anxiety isn't always bad, right? Sometimes it's actually doing its job, right? It's alerting us to real danger. In those cases, avoidance obviously is, appropriate and protective. But a lot of the time, anxiety is just responding to situations that aren't actually dangerous. They're just uncomfortable or uncertain. And in those moments, our job becomes helping children stay present and supported through the feeling rather than escaping it. So the goal isn't to get rid of anxiety altogether, but it's to help kids learn, I can feel anxious, I can move through this, and to help build their ability to cope in the moment rather than avoid it. So we want to break down what an anxious response might actually look like in a child, because anxiety isn't just one thing, okay? It shows up in different parts of an experience. One way to understand it is to think about three main areas. We got feelings, we got the body, and we got thoughts, right? Emotionally, a child might feel scared, sad, overwhelmed, or even surprised by how strong the feeling is. Sometimes they can name it, and sometimes they just say, I don't feel good, or I really don't like this. In the body, anxiety often shows up physically, right? Kids might feel hot, sweaty, shaky, nauseated. Their heart might be racing, or they might say that their stomach hurts, or their body just feels off. And we have the thoughts, right? This is where anxiety often starts to build. Child might be thinking things like, what if something bad happens? What if I'm going to fail? I'm not going to be able to handle this. An important piece here is helping kids slowly learn to question those thoughts, right? How likely is this going to happen, right? Or is this the only possible outcome? And then there's behavior, right? Especially, like I said, avoidance. So we start to look at what is the child avoiding because of their fear. Maybe they're avoiding school, social situations, certain activities. This is also where caregiver responses become really important. Our natural instinct is often to protect children from distress, but sometimes that can unintentionally reinforce avoidance, like stepping in too quickly or removing challenges altogether, right? We want them to learn. The issue is that avoidance tends to strengthen anxiety over time, and the more we avoid something, the more powerful and threatening that it can feel. So instead, we want to support, right? Our goal, we want to support alternative ways of responding. So helping children stay engaged in small, manageable steps, while also offering coping tools for the feelings, the thoughts, the physical sensations that come up. So it's not about pushing kids into overwhelming situations, right? We don't want to do that. But it's about helping them build tolerance gradually with support so they can learn, again, I can do hard things even if I feel anxious. I got this. So this brings up that really practical question, right? How can I actually help my child cope with anxiety in everyday life, right? A good starting point is always self-care. And I really mean like basics, okay? Sleep, nutrition, movement, routines. These are all pretty basic things that we do every day, right? When those things are off, anxiety tends to feel bigger and harder to manage. So sometimes the foundation really matters more than we realize, and we don't think about that. If I'm getting home really late from whatever activity that I'm doing and I expect my kid to wake up with reduced sleep, they might be more stressed or anxious, right? If I'm not eating a balanced meal, right, my body might respond. If I'm not moving, right, or I'm not sticking to my routine, that can be really hard for kiddos. Another key piece is helping children not avoid what's making them anxious. Again, we're not talking about forcing kids into overwhelming situations. I'm not trying to ask you to do that, but gently supporting them and facing things in small, manageable steps so that they can build their confidence over time and they know that you're there to support them with that. It's also helpful to encourage realistic expectations, right? Sometimes kids build situations up in their minds in ways that feel much bigger than reality. So helping them slow down, right? Look at what's actually likely, you know, going to happen. That can be really grounding, right? At the same time, we always want to validate their feelings. So something like, I can see this feels really scary for you, while also offering encouragement like, and I know you got this, you can handle that, right? Both parts matter. Focusing on strengths is another important strategy. Instead of only looking at what feels hard, we want to remind kids of the times that they've managed challenges before, right? That is going to build their confidence. We have open-ended questions. These are also really helpful. So instead of like asking them yes or no questions, right? We might ask things like, what part of this feels the hardest to you? Or what do you think might help you feel more ready or more prepared? And a big goal is helping children learn to be comfortable with discomfort, right? Not to eliminate anxiety completely, but to learn I can feel anxious and still get through this. We can also help them think through their anxiety instead of just reacting to it. So slowing them down, breaking it apart, looking at it step by step, right? And finally, one of the most important, powerful tools is modeling, right? When children see their caregivers managing their own stress or anxiety in healthy ways, like taking a pause, problem solving, using coping strategies, they learn those skills through example. So overall, it's not one single strategy, but it's a combination of support, validation, gentle guidance, and modeling that helps children build confidence in managing their anxiety over time. So just also a few practical, or what I would call like, kind of tactile things that can help reduce anxiety and in the moment over time. One helpful tool is meditation or guided breathing practices. Again, these do not have to be long and complicated. Even short, simple strategies can help kids slow their bodies down and bring their attention back to the present. One of the best I love to do is like, if I feel anxious, I make sure I can feel my feet touching the ground, like just grounding myself, putting myself back in this moment so I can get out of my anxious head, right? There's also star breathing, right? This is where a child traces a star with their finger while breathing in and out slowly. So in, out, right? In, out. And the slower you go, it helps bring the calming down, or even what we call square breathing. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Slow 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going a little fast because time, but definitely breathing is pretty critical. The idea is that the physical movement helps guide the breathing and gives them something concrete to focus on. Another strategy is something we call talking back to fears. This is where we help children use positive self-talk to challenge anxious thoughts. So for example, instead of thinking something bad is going to happen, they might learn to say, I've handled things like this before, or I can take this step by step. I got this. We also want to teach the idea of responding instead of reacting. So stopping for a moment, thinking, and then calming the body before responding, right? Anxiety often pushes kids to react quickly. So we're helping them build that really good, healthy pause that they need. Another useful strategy is helping children design what we call a safe place in their mind or their imagination, right? It could be a real place, somewhere they feel comfortable, or an imagined space where they feel calm, safe, and in control. We also encourage creating an anxiety coping plan. This is basically a list of things a child can turn to when they're feeling overwhelmed. Excuse me, people they trust, places they feel safe, or activities that can help them calm down. And we can make this really concrete by also using what we call I statements. For example, a child might say, when I'm feeling alone and anxious, I will go do this, right? I will take a few deep breaths, or I will listen to music in my room. Um, for another child, it might be when I feel anxious at school, I will ask my teacher for help. I will ask for a break, or I will use breathing strategies. The goal is to give kiddos a personalized toolkit so they're not stuck in that anxiety, but instead have clear steps that they can take away to help them feel more grounded and supported. So really quickly on this slide, we're focusing on what we can do in the moment when a child feels anxious or overwhelmed. When the anxiety is already present, we're trying to help them settle their system, okay? This is, again, a very simple but powerful tool, is just slowing things down altogether. Some people call this like a woosah moment, right? Where we pause, we breathe slowly and deeply together. And the key here is co-regulation. And remember, you modeling behavior, kiddos are going to feel more comfortable doing this, right? Kiddos often can't calm their bodies alone yet. They just don't know how, right? So our calm presence helps them borrow our regulation until they can do it on their own. Another helpful strategy is bringing in five senses, right? Again, these are grounding techniques, but can gently guide a child to notice what they see, hear, feel, smell, or even taste in the moment, right? Helps them anchor back into the present instead of staying stuck in their worried thoughts. And also physical reassurance can be really grounding. That might look like sitting with them, offering a hand to hold, or simply just being close in a calm and steady way, right? If the child's comfortable with that. Sometimes just not being alone in that feeling makes a big difference for them. It's also really helpful to remind children that anxiety is not forever, right? Something simple like, this is gonna pass, right? Can be really powerful, especially when they're in the middle of it and it feels really big. And at the same time, we're also teaching an important skill, which is learning to sit with discomfort, not rushing to fix or avoid it immediately, but recognizing I can be okay with this even while the feeling is here. I'm gonna be okay. Can also guide them to imagine a safe, calming place, like I said. And finally, encouraging coping activities that help the body and mind settle over time. Things like meditation, yoga, drawing, journaling, these can all help kiddos process and regulate their emotions in healthy ways. Again, overall, this slide is about presence, right? Helping them feel safe, supported, and not alone while their nervous system comes back down. But again, this can bring up an important question. When should I consider seeking professional help for my kiddo? First and foremost, if your child's asking for help, that's always something to really take seriously. Even if it doesn't seem severe, it's a sign that they're recognizing something doesn't feel right and they need some support. Another clear indicator is if there are any concerns about your child being a harm to themselves or others, right? In situations, you want to seek immediate support from some, resources that are available. You might also notice that the coping strategies you've been using, things that used to help, aren't working as effectively anymore, or that your child seems stuck in their anxiety or stress, even with support. A really important sign is its impact on functioning. So if stress or anxiety is getting in the way of daily life, like school, attendance, friendships, sleep, family routines, that's when we probably want to start thinking about additional support. And just as importantly, if you as a parent are feeling like it's becoming harder to support your child on your own, that's a valid reason to reach out, right? Seeking help is not a sign that something's wrong. It's a way of getting more tools and support in place. So who can help? We have some options. We have mental health professionals, therapists, counselors, working directly with children on coping skills, emotion regulation. Sometimes psychiatry can help, especially if medication is being considered. Support groups can be really helpful for both kiddos and for parents because they create a sense of shared experience and connection. And we have pediatricians. They're often a good first step. They can help assess what's going on, guide you towards appropriate resources. And the main takeaway here is that support is available, and reaching out early can really make a big difference in helping kiddos build skills and feel supported over time. Promise this is the last slide. I've been talking a lot. I am here from TChat, so that is a resource. We have been partnered with Katy ISD for many years. We are very appreciative of that partnership. But TChat, Texas Child Health Access through Telemedicine, is a program that provides in-school virtual behavioral health care for children and adolescents who might be experiencing emotional or behavioral health challenges. One of the really helpful parts of this program is that it connects students with licensed mental health professionals through telehealth. Often during the school day, we work with the school counselors to help coordinate that. Just emphasizing something important here. If your child is struggling with mental or behavioral health, they're not alone. You know, these kinds of challenges are actually really, really common. Anxiety is really, really common. And that's why supports like this specifically exist, to help. We're free, we're virtual, designed to work in partnership with schools so that students don't have to miss a significant amount of class time to receive support. So if this is something you want to learn more about or are interested in, please talk to your child's school counselor. They are the best at getting you information and resources that are going to best fit your kiddos' needs. And they can walk you through the process of TChat, let you know what services are available at your campus. So again, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope you get to take away some things related to stress and anxiety. And that's all I got. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Megan. It was lots of good information, lots of good practical strategies and tips that you shared. So as we heard her say, anxiety, especially during testing season, is something that many of our kids experience. But with the right tools and understanding, we as parents can help them navigate these challenges with confidence. So if you have any specific concerns or questions about anxiety in general or need additional support, if you have any questions about TChat services that Megan mentioned, we encourage you to reach out to your child's campus counselor. Our staff here in Katy is always here to help support and connect you with additional resources if needed. So as we wrap up this evening, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us for our final Legacy Parent Academy for the year. Again, this presentation is being recorded and we'll be uploading the presentation to our district website in the coming days. And that's it for tonight. I hope you all have a great evening. Good night.